Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You're watching Newcastle Fast FM. This is the late show live, as we are every evening during the month of Ramadan. This is a program where we have different guests coming on every night throughout this blessed month. And there's been so many different topics that we've talked about based upon people's different interests, different specialities, and all of that sort of stuff. So let me introduce my co-host first of all, Brother Jamal. Salam alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. E.T., how's everyone doing? Hope you're well, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah. Well, man, you missed a couple of good sessions, you know?
I did, yeah. Well, I think actually last night I missed. I was there the night before.
Yeah, last time.
Yeah. But
it was good catching up with Brother Umar again after such a long time, you know.
Yeah, I saw a little bit.
Umar from Scotland.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. Miss him. I haven't seen him for a long time.
Yeah, it's been a while. Alhamdulillah. He's doing good though. We had a good conversation about Islam, Dawah in Scotland, and loads of other stuff.
Yeah,
almost like lots of banter, yeah?
Yeah,
absolutely. So tonight we have another special guest. It's going to be very interesting, tonight's program. I've got a lot of questions. I got a lot of questions for this brother right here. So let's go straight into it.
Yeah,
brother.
Defour, yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Defour?
Yeah, it's French.
All right. All right, Brother Robert, salam alaikum. How you doing?
Wa alaikum salam. I'm doing very well. Hopefully you guys are having a blessed Ramadan, inshallah. Yeah, we're doing well here. It's a nice, cool month. The days are getting shorter, and it's a kind of a silver lining that we're all at home because to reestablish our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Absolutely. And it's one of the things where every year we say this, that the month has gone so quickly. We're at the last 10 nights, guys. Yeah, this is the last 10 blessed nights of Ramadan, and it seems to have gone really, I don't know about you guys, but for me it seems to have gone really, really quickly. It's one of those things. Every year we do the same thing. Yeah. Subhanallah.
Wow.
Okay, so Robert, tell us, obviously you're from Canada. You're from I guess French-speaking Canada, are you?
No, English-speaking Canada. I'm from Ontario, from a city just outside Windsor called Amherstburg. It's about 20,000 people. I actually relearned French after I became Muslim. So
Subhanallah.
Yeah, and I'm the only person in my family that speaks French. Like all my ancestors, they all reacculturated to English. So I'm from English-speaking Canada.
But your ancestry is French, though. French European came to Canada.
Yeah, I'm a mixture of different European backgrounds. My father's French Canadian. My mom's from the States, but she has Polish, Armenian, so like Eastern European. So that's why I have darker features than other white guys.
Okay, alhamdulillah. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Robert. Tell us a little bit about your background prior to Islam, coming to Islam. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I grew up in a small town, like I said. Pretty standard family. Pretty supportive of me and everything. I was very lazy. I was living at home for a long time and only working part-time at a pizza place. It was actually run by Muslims. We weren't practicing. It was run by Muslims. So my life really wasn't going anywhere. And then after 9/11 happened, I started to really get into politics and conspiracy theories specifically. So I would look up conspiracy theories on the internet because I had a very inquisitive mind, and I didn't really buy what the media was selling me. That sort of led me to Islam in a way. I didn't really know much about it other than I think I watched Malcolm X, the movie, a couple of times. And we had a field trip to the mosque once in high school. My interest was piqued because I was, looking into different things in the world. And one day decided to type up Islam on the internet. And the first website I came to had a picture of the unborn baby in the mother's womb. And I'm like, what does this have to do with Islam? Do I have the right website? And did I click the wrong link or something? And yeah, it talked about how like the Quran contains scientific information that they only know with the technology of the 20th century, and it just blew my mind. It was like, there's no way a human being could write a book like this. So I read Surat al-Baqarah in like one night, and then I studied Islam on my own for like about 8-9 months. And then yeah, one Ramadan, I just decided to go to the mosque. Finally worked up the courage to go there, and ended up taking my shahada that day.
Inshallah.
Yeah, yeah. So a week later, I told my family, and alhamdulillah, they had no problem with it. So I was one of the lucky ones. But yeah, so then years gone by. It took a while for me to like finally get my life back together and actually learn a skill, get a career and everything. But yeah, it's pretty much it. Yeah. So
Okay, alhamdulillah. I mean, that's an interesting story. It's interesting for a number of reasons, because the build up to it, working with Muslims, whether they're practicing or not, but working with Muslims, and then 9/11. And you know what? You're not the first person that I've heard who got their interest about Islam due to September the 11th. There's a number of converts who went through that, reverts, they went through that sort of phase and opened up that discussion for them, I guess, opened up that interest for them to learn more about the religion of Islam. And that inquisitive mind is exactly, what Allah tells us in the Quran about the one who is a truth seeker, the one who sincerely looks for the truth. Allah will guide that person to the truth. So there's a number of things which is interesting from that. And then obviously you found your way through studying, through reading, researching, and then you accepted the truth of Islam, which is amazing, subhanallah. And may Allah accept it from you.
yeah, subhanallah, yeah. May Allah accept it from all of us. I very lucky, like the only convert basically in my whole town. So I feel like I have like a special responsibility to those people, to try to be the best person you can be. But yeah, I mean, like you tell people some of these miracles, and some people are just like, wow, that's pretty impressive. The others try to explain it away, and like at the end of the day, the guidance is up to Allah. So I mean, it's inevitable.
That's a simple, yeah, that's basically what it comes down to.
Yeah. What I wanted to ask actually was, so your Muslim employer, at the time you're working for them, did they ever give you dawah?
Not really. Like their adab was good. Like they're very generous, hardworking. They really whipped me into shape. I was a really lazy kid, so like I had to learn the ropes really fast and everything. So I did learn a lot from them. And they had one of their friends was a practicing Muslim as well. So even though they weren't practicing Muslims, like at the very least, like there's still that that culture of generosity and and hard work and things like that that sort of point you in the right direction. But yeah, I know this was a completely independent project on my part. I didn't even tell them that I was studying Islam until after I converted. So,
MashaAllah. And Jamal, obviously, you took your Shahada pre 9/11, though, right? So you took your Shahada in the 90s.
Yes.
How did September 11th affect like you and your family in particular, your non-Muslim family? What kind of impact did it have on you?
There was only one incident after 9/11, and that was like in the aftermath of 9/11, where it was actually someone who lived on my road, and myself and my family were coming home from visiting relatives, and I think this guy had been drinking, and as we were going past, he felt quite, he had a bit of Dutch courage, and he just but all he said was like, watch out for tall buildings. That's all he said, and and I knew that he'd been drinking, so I didn't really say anything to him. Actually, I did, but I don't want to repeat what I said. I didn't swear, but I responded in a way where it was a bit sort of challenging. But I knew he wasn't going to do or say anything because it was just drinking. He was under the influence. But apart from that, I mean, obviously there was just that tension that all Muslims had in the aftermath. Like, obviously. Wondering what's going to happen, how are people going to respond, how they're going to, how are they going to attack or whatever. But that was it really, that one incident. But I know for others, it was far worse.
Okay, alhamdulillah. How did it affect your non-Muslim family members though? Did they have any comments, questions, issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think every revert has maybe some one or more relative who are a little bit antagonistic towards Islam. So you'd get something, but again, because of the adab of like prior to that, you kind of end up getting backed up by the other family members. Because I always say that people get a feel of Islam through yourself and through the good Muslims. They always do, So I always say to someone, when they say about Muslims are extremists and Muslims are terrorists or whatever, ask them about their neighbors. They wouldn't have a bad thing to say about their neighbor, their Muslim neighbor. So that's a testimony, really.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
So brother Robert, you've got a website called Islam for Europeans. Is that right? IslamforEuropeans.com?
Yep, that is correct. It's a Dawa website that talks about issues related to Muslims of European descent, our relationship with the greater Muslim community, and also I guess our qawm, or our tribes people, are non-Muslims of European descent, and North America and Australia as well, because we're living in very kind of like different times compared to even 10 years ago, where we are kind of facing a unique situation where we're facing a lot of Islamophobia, from certain white people in the white community, whose anger has been magnified by Trump, Brexit, different nationalist movements in European countries, and then on the other end, some of the more liberal Muslims are unifying with more like leftist groups, where it's more identitarian politics, in order to gain
which has its own issues as well, of
allies.
course. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, that has its own issues in and of itself, for sure. I mean, I can totally relate to you when you say about the whole, number one, identity politics, but also the issue around the far right, the fascists, the extremists from the far right. Because I live up in the northeast of England, which is very different to London. Jamal will tell you that he's from London. I'm from the north, and he's from the south. It's a different ball game altogether, in the sense of, for me personally, I have a lot of conversations with the far right, especially with our dawah. When we do our dawah work up here, we have a greater presence, I guess, of the far right and the fascist movements. And for me, I have a slightly different approach, I guess, to many people who deal with that. I like to open up a conversation with individuals from those groups, rather than be sort of antagonistic, or rather than be defensive, or rather than get confrontational. We actually have a decent relationship with the far right up here in the north, in the sense that we can have open conversations,
But
and we can have clarifications with that.
At,
Yes.
do you not find that it's easier for you to do that because of the fact that you head an organization that deals with communicating with the wider community? I mean, what about the AT 20 years ago?
Yeah, so this is where I was saying that, at the moment, as it stands with our dawah organization, we're able to have those conversations. We're able to have a sit down. I'll give you a quick example. One of the leaders, if you like, of the Northeast EDL, he attended some of our events, and the more he attended, and I was actually quite surprised, he brought his whole crew, about 15, 20 of them. They came and they started attending some of the programs. And the more they attended and the more they had conversations with us, the more they changed their viewpoints. Him in particular, he was the head at the time. And it wasn't just me, it was other Muslims as well in the community he was having conversations with. And basically, with just like the brother said, with the good manners, with having intelligence, with clarifications, and giving just some very decent dawah, if you like, he actually stepped down from the head of the EDL. He left the whole movement. And
Wow.
he changed his views completely. Whereas 20 years ago, in the 90s, 80s, 90s, growing up, it was a very, very different scenario. Obviously, we were teenagers and stuff. And the other problem is there was no Dawah organizations. There was no Dawah centers. There was maybe one or two mosques. And they were your typical sort of Asian uncles and elders who didn't really mix, if that makes sense. That was 20, 25 years ago, right? 30 years ago. Things have changed a lot, though, since then. And now it's not a case of trying to sort of clash with individuals like that, because I empathize somewhat with some of their sentiment in terms of the ignorance and that they have, and some of the things that they've been fed, the lies that they've been fed. So when you sit down with them and talk to them, most people will just have a normal conversation, especially when there's no drink involved and there's none of their group to be with them. So the little crew, if you like. So I think for us, it's a slightly different situation up here that in some regards I can completely empathize with where they're coming from, because they just don't know any better until you have those conversations. And I guess that's what the purpose of Islam for Europeans website is for, Brother Robert, if I'm not mistaken, is to break down some of those barriers and say, let's have a conversation about this. Let's discuss these issues, that some of the fears that you have, some of the issues that you're bringing to the table. Let me dispel some of them, and let's have an open and frank discussion.
Yeah, and it's definitely what we feel is our obligation, I guess. Because we come from a European background. Instead of trying to sort of reject our own community, which is what a lot of sort of converts do in general sometimes, unfortunately, especially in North America in the early 90s and early 2000s. They'll change the way they dress, change the way they act, change the way they talk. If they're a white convert, they'll be like racist. I'm rejecting my family. I'm going, I'm disowning them. I'm getting, and that they just burn all these bridges down. When really, if you're doing that, you're doing a disservice to the greater Muslim community.
Of course, like for the Dawah especially. But
right.
There's one thing that's interesting, because over here, with the experiences that I've had in Britain and Europe with many of the reverts here, it's been the other way around. Whereas the person who accepted Islam didn't disown the family and the community, the family disowned them.
Yeah.
And rejected them and said, "Look, get out my house." Many people become homeless as a result of it. And this is one of the things that we've had to put in place as a community, as a wider Muslim community, having a good, strong new Muslim network and support in case of when these incidents do happen. So it's interesting, because in North America you say it's the other way around, but over here it's slightly different in that
they
regard.
do get disowned. Yeah, there's different levels. Some of them do get disowned, unfortunately. So the way we look at it is, when it comes to converts as a whole, if you look at if you look at it like a Venn diagram, we have a lot in common. So there's a lot of commonalities between me and a convert from black convert from South Philadelphia, and the fact that our families are not Muslim, our communities are not Muslim. They're drinking, they're doing drugs, they're getting involved in violence, gambling, so in that sense there's commonalities. But our approach is, in addition to looking at it from a holistic perspective, each group of converts, based on their background, it's important for them to have a sub community as well, because there's some things that me as a white convert would understand, growing up, say for example, as an African American, growing up in the United States, right? So I can provide some insight in terms of being a convert, but a lot of the times, you want that perspective from people who grew up with that background. So we didn't create this website to be exclusionary. We created it to to add more to the community, because our idea of a sub community is a group of Muslims who have the same subculture, who come from the same background. They keep their culture. They keep ties with their family. They keep ties with their greater cultural community. But at the same time, they're still connected to the greater ummah. And I think that's important for people to have that, because especially in the United States, because if you look at the African American community, they had the largest mass conversion to Sunni Islam in the last 300 years, from what I can in recent memory. And when Malcolm left the NOI and converted to traditional Sunni Islam, he opened the doors of dawah to all the community. He said that white people should study Islam, but at the same time he still had his own organization dedicated to helping the status of African Americans. So for us, we didn't create this website to be a white nationalist offshoot. We looked at it as, this is our responsibility, this is who we are. We're still Muslim. We want to be connected to the greater Muslim community, but as Muslims from a European background, it's our responsibility to kind of foster this idea that you can be white and you can convert to Islam, which is a lot of misconception that can be common. B, the more strength we are in numbers, the greater voice we can have. So sometimes it's not giving dawah. Sometimes it's not about converting people to Islam. Sometimes it's about getting maybe the white Islamophobe down the street from a -100 to a -99. So maybe he'll change his mind and end up not going to that anti-mosque rally, right? So the more we have in numbers for this, we can help grow our Muslim sub community from the ground up. And that way, it solves a lot of issues from across the board. Even the left-leaning Muslims who are more liberal, they may have issues with white converts even, or white people in general, because of privilege. But this solves that problem, because what could be more visibly Muslim than having our own organization, right? So and we are
that's true. That's very true, and I do agree with most of that. I think the only issue with that is, and again, this is from experiences over here, because we have quite up in the north, we have quite a large revert population from the English community and outside of the English community, if ethnic minority community, I guess we could call it. Yeah. Now, the interesting thing is, whenever we have people from within the white reverts who are doing dawah on the front line with us, we regularly get comments such as, "Oh, you're a traitor to the race, right? You're a traitor to our race," and a rejection from their own community with regards to when they're trying to give dawah to them. And then when somebody like me, who's not white English, gives dawah to the same people, we get a more of a positive reaction sometimes. Not all the time, mind, but sometimes we do. So I think in some cases, yes, and in some cases, no. It all depends on the situation, the community, the individual, and so on and so forth. So I think we have to take it a bit more with on a case-by-case scenario. But because if you think about it from this point of view, one of the things that I always say when it comes to whether it's the non-Muslim community, the new Muslim community, the Muslims who are born in Muslim families, etc. One of the things that I always do, even as part of my da'wah, when I'm calling non-Muslims to understand what Islam actually stands for, and this is, I strongly believe this, one of the most beautiful things about Islam is the diversity that it represents. It transgresses, borders, nationalities, cultures. And I think Malcolm X, you mentioned Malcolm X earlier, I think he best encapsulated it in his letter from Hajj, where upon his return, he said, America needs to understand Islam, because this is the one religion that erases from it from its society the race problem. It erases from its society the race problem. So yeah, I think this is one of the things that is one of the most beautiful aspects of the religion of the Deen of Islam, the religion of Islam. But at the same time, having said that, it respects and values people's traditions and cultures, so long as it doesn't contradict the Islamic principles and the Sunnah, of course. Right. And in some cases, it's even intertwined, where both the culture and the religion can overlap. In other cases, it can become Islam versus culture, right? So depending on the cultural practices and things like that. So I think it's one of those things, one of the most beautiful key aspects of the religion is the concept of the ummah and the concept of the diversity. It's one of the reasons why the Prophet ﷺ said, and I strongly believe this, that Islam will enter into every home because of this diversity and this, going beyond these man-made structures, political and social constructs. Islam transcends all of that, and I think that's one of the most beautiful things about it.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you. I think diversity is one of the wonderful things about Islam. I think for some converts, though, and who are in kind of these situations where they have a lot of heat coming from their family members. See, we have to look at it this way as well. In the Muslim world, we have all the different. We have Islam in all these different countries, and Islam is represented by that country. So, for example, in China, Islam looks Chinese. I mean, the mosques look like pagodas. In Malaysia, Islam looks Malay. I mean, the masjids, very similar to Malaysian architecture. In Africa, Islam looks African, right? So the culture, like Islam is not culturally predatory, and I think
it influences the practices. Yeah. So
in
terms of like the architecture and the clothing, no doubt. I think that's why I said that it can even be intertwined, because you have from a Sunnah perspective, you have the framework of Islam, where there is room for maneuver and movement for basically adapting to or for allowing certain cultural practices to be acceptable, right? So things like the way you cook your chicken, Robert, will be different to the way I cook my chicken. But as long as it's halal, then it's all good, right? So that's where the diversity, the beauty of the diversity is expanded upon.
Well, yeah, I think we're pretty much in agreement. I think looking at a little bit more in depth, if we look at several Muslim cultures, they tend to be very endogamous. So, a lot of them marry within the same, don't even want to marry outside the same city or without, outside the same country. Now, I used to think that was, full out racist, but many times, it's out of necessity. I mean, just again, Islam respects diversity and everything, but I think for a lot of converts, many times they rush into things like marriage, and they're in a totally different situation than people growing up in a Muslim family. So, for example, we don't date in Islam. So, the fact that you don't know this person through dating, the Muslim family, they have usually a network of people they know. They can investigate the family. They can find out, what's wrong with this person. Would this be a suitable match for my son or a daughter? Whereas for the convert, they're in a totally different situation because they don't know anybody. So a lot of times they go into a Muslim community as complete outsiders. So they're not dating, but at the same time, they really have no way of investigating what a potential match might be like. And again, they have to learn the deen. They have to learn how to pray. They have to learn all these things. It's a huge, incredible learning curve. And sometimes it can work out, I'm not saying that it's that converts should only marry with other converts all the time, but I'm just saying that, in many contexts, a lot of the times, they think, this is going to solve all of our problems, getting married quickly right away to a different culture. But many times that's not the case. And a lot of times it ends in divorce. It can end in very ugly divorce sometimes. And this is a reality. So even within Muslim cultures within the same country, city to city, I've seen it. They've seen it before where they wanted to get married to each other. Say for example, a Palestinian from Gaza and a Palestinian from Nablus, and it ended up being a disaster because the culture is totally different. So I understand where people are coming from.
Is that to do with culture though, or is that to do with compatibility? Like, for example, what I mean by that is, marriage is a bit, and I'm going to let Jamal talk about this because he's been involved in this for such a long time. He's got a lot of experience in dealing with marriages and helping brothers and sisters get married, especially from the reverts. But for marriage in general is it's not an easy thing anyway. It's not something which, even if
No.
if you marry somebody from within your own community and culture, it's still a difficult thing. There's no guarantee that it's going to be successful, right? So
Right.
there's huge divorce rate in South Asians, for example, at the moment, even though they're married from the same tribe and whatever else. So I think, I don't know, is that something to do with the modern day world that we live in today, or is it something to do with just general compatibility issues, or is it to do with the cultural differences, or is it a combination of all of them? You know, so it's a bit more complex, I think, than simplifying it just as somebody from a different culture, and that's one of the reasons why. Even though I'm not opposed to people marrying from, converts marrying other converts, I'm not opposed to that either. I think it's a bit more of a complex situation than that, though. Personally,
I find it very interesting, actually, because first of all, I can't imagine a white revert experiencing difficulties in getting married outside of or into any other culture. In the UK, I used to refer to like white reverts. So when I used to have my marriage service, as like hot property, because because it was just very easy. And then Robert, you mentioned about like the, sort of like cultural kind of differences. But even then, I've always found that other cultures would sort of would sort of they'd sort of buckle to try to adapt to the revert's culture, depending on what maybe the expectations might be of that revert. For example, maybe some things they might be used to, and stuff like that. But yeah, I find it quite interesting when you said that, because that's quite new to me. I'm sure in Canada it might be the same as everywhere else in the world when it comes to white reverts. I mean, usually it's like not too much of a problem, but you said that you experienced that a lot in Canada.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of converts just get into marriage right away, and this didn't happen to me personally. Alhamdulillah, like I'm happily married now, but we've seen many converts get into marriage, and sometimes it's both parties have the best interest in mind, and it's still a very high divorce rate. And I understand it's a very complex situation, but a lot of times it can ruin the convert's iman. So I think they really need to sit down and say, like, what are your expectations? What are the expectations of each family? Because a lot of the times on both sides, they don't really realize what they're getting into. So I'm just, all I'm saying is that it's not a panacea. A lot of people think that, like, oh, let's just, like marry people willy nilly, like it's square dancing. I mean, like a lot of the times it doesn't work that way, and it's a very complicated situation, especially when they first convert to Islam, because they don't know what their rights are, they don't know what their responsibilities are, and they're coming in as complete outsiders. So I agree, it's a very complicated situation. For normally for white converts, yeah, we get a lot of marriage proposals, but again, those it's may not necessarily be a good thing all the time, because a lot of the times you have these people who are just starting out, and like, again, like I said, with a non-Muslim family, you have no protective factors. So like,
definitely,
if you don't have a Muslim family to protect you, if the husband gets out of line, you don't have your Muslim uncle is going to come beat you up, or and that can create a lot of issues as well too.
Definitely.
So
I guess one of the things that I would say to that is, one of the things that we teach with our new Muslim support programs over here up in the north, certainly, is, and I'm sure Jamal says the same thing. And like I mentioned, Jamal's been involved with, trying to organize marriages and help people who need to get married in the past for many, many years, as have I. Especially with the revert situation, it is. Yeah, there certainly are some challenges. That is true. But one of the things that I always tell the new Muslim, the revert, don't worry about marriage for now. Focus on learning your deen, understand the basic principles of your religion, understand your rights and what needs to be done, and then we can think about that later on. When you're ready for that, then we'll help you with that as well, and we'll support you with that as well, as and when it comes. So 100% I agree with that. Every single Muslim, not just reverts, but every single Muslim should know their religion to a certain degree and a certain standard before they even contemplate marriage. You know, that's my general advice I give to everybody anyway, regardless
Absolutely.
whether they are reverts or born into Muslim families.
Absolutely, I agree with that 100%. Obviously, there is that same challenge of when a new revert, you know, comes into the deen, and the first thing they're told is, "Oh, now you just need to get married," and it is literally one of the first things they're told, you know. And but you know, obviously, that can be problematic as well. But I mean, just going back to the you know the website that you have, Islam for Europeans. I wanted to find out from you, like, when did you set this up, and what were the I know you mentioned some of the reasons for you know setting it up, but do you really have, even within, you know, in Canada, for example, as a white revert? I know, AT, you also mentioned that the brothers in Newcastle, they get sort of you know, a bit of slack from the white non-Muslim community, but at the same time, I mean,
Not the whole white non-Muslim community, just the certain very small segment who are linked to the far right and the fascists.
Because I
The
mean,
vast majority are absolutely spot on up here. They are very, very friendly and very open.
Yeah, because that's what I was thinking. I mean, even for Robert in Canada, maybe, you know, you must have some really good, you know, like stories of where, you know, you've helped the, you know, your community, for example, and people kind of are a bit pleasantly surprised that, oh, you're Muslim, and you know, and that becoming like a good source of dawah.
Yeah, man, in Canada, everyone gets along, don't they?
Yeah, no, we're pretty friendly up here for the most part. It's Canada's interesting because we're very widely spread out. You know, like and it's Islam is kind of in its infancy, like you were talking about what Britain was 20 years ago. That's kind of like where we're at now, because
Right.
aside from Toronto, you know, like the cities are very far apart. You might have just 1, 10, maybe 50 Muslims in like these smaller towns and cities, max. So it's really in its infancy stage, and there's not a lot of converts. And it's kind of a chicken or the egg problem too, because you know, the more converts there are in a large city, the more like people are, you know, oh, this might be something for me. Like these people, like they grew up with the same background,
Normalized,
I
isn't
could
it?
become Muslim
Yeah.
too. So I don't think it's become quite normalized as yet, and I think it's kind of a different situation. But in terms of the website, it started about a year ago, by a Russian brother. His name is Harun, and he, you know, like his perspective is more because they're born Muslim there, you know, the white Russian Muslims, and their experience, you know, in Eastern Europe, you know, where it's situations even way more difficult. So we're kind of in different situations, but at the same time, we have to. Part of the reason why we created is not just because, you know, to say, oh, we're oppressed. No, that's not what it's about. You know, a lot of the times, you know, a lot of these Muslim communities don't really know what to do with, you know, the white convert, especially in Canada. So their idea is to like assimilate them into the Muslim community, which is understandable because we're like the only one, you know, maybe the only one in the mosque. So you know, they're just doing what they know. But for us, it's more about creating an integrated identity where, you know, like we're still connected to our white community. We're fully Muslim, you know, like we follow all the tenets of Islam. We don't believe in racism, you know, like, and for us, like this is our special responsibility because, you know, Allah, you know, guided us for, you know, like a certain reason. Like we have, you know, we have to do something on our end, and as a collective group, we feel that, you know, even with a small website like this, you know, we can normalize the idea of, you know, white people saying, you know, converting to Islam and staying in the Deen. So yeah, that's probably like the main reasons why we created this website.
That's brilliant. I think it's a noble effort for sure, because I see where you're coming from, and I see the purpose behind it. One thing that I would like to ask though is, you know, with regards to when you said that when they go to the mosques and they assimilate them into the mosques and things like that, because there's so few numbers, essentially. One of the things that's interesting is and I don't know if it's the same in Canada. I mean, I was in Toronto in just November gone, and it was an interesting place. And I've been to other parts of Canada. I think it was Ontario, or was it Quebec? I can't remember. Yeah, it was about 10 years ago, or more than 10 years ago. But the point is, over here for sure we have, and I'm assuming it's the same over there, lots of different mosques with different backgrounds. So you might have over here, you might have something like the Pakistani mosque or the Bangladeshi mosque, and things like that, which is really the problem that I have with those type of mosques is they're very culturally orientated rather than Islamically orientated, if that makes sense. If I can use that term, I don't know if it's the right way of articulating it, but sometimes you get certain Muslim communities or certain mosques which are they're more cultural than they are religious, if that makes sense. And the mosques that I normally try to link myself with and work with are the mosques that are the most diverse. So for example, the mosques that are very close to the Sunnah and practicing the Sunnah, like our mosque here in Newcastle Central Mosque, we have over 33 different nationalities praying in that masjid, from the management committee all the way down to the congregation. It's extremely diverse, and they're the type of masajid which really represent the true beauty and essence of Islam in that diversity that comes with it, and nobody really feels like an outsider in that regard. So
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, is it because of the cultural type of mosques that the reverts have been assimilated to, or is it something a bit more than that?
Well, I actually disagree. I think the umbrella masjid definitely has its place, and it's very important to have that umbrella masjid in large cities. But I love the quote unquote ethnic or cultural masjids, because you when you go in there, they don't disallow anybody from going in there, but you become part of, you enter into that culture. So that culture is represented by that brick and mortar masjid. So for example, in Windsor, where I grew up, we have the Turkish club. We have a mosque that's run by the Tablighi Jamaat, that's mostly South Asian, and we have the umbrella mosque. In Chatham, which is a small city of about 40,000 people, there's a Darul Uloom, and I would say 100% of them are South Asian, and it's in the middle of this white community, like this suburban white community. So it's really out of nowhere. And I had a good talk with the imam of that masjid, and he agreed with me. Like, look, he agrees that, like, look, like when people convert to Islam in this city, like, we wouldn't know what to do with them, because like we had come from a totally different cultural background. And I told him, look, like, what if we had like sort of like an auxiliary, group, for converts. We have our own little office space, brick and mortar place, specifically for us, and Salat time comes, everyone comes and prays. But at the same time, there's a place, a room at least dedicated for those who are interested in Islam, where they can talk to someone, who's from that particular background. And that doesn't mean that only we should be giving da'wah to our own people. I mean, anyone can give da'wah. It doesn't matter where they're from. But no, I disagree. I actually think the quote unquote cultural masjid, or even like in Canada, we have groups based on Muslim groups based on nationality. Like, for example, the Syrian Muslim community. I went to their Eid prayer a couple of years ago, and you need a community like that for Syrians who are refugees who need to get acclimated here. So I think the umbrella masjid definitely has its place, but we totally support different Muslim groups having their own organization, because that like embodies the culture of the people. Like even when the Habashis, when they came and went to the Eid prayer in the Prophet's mosque, that everyone knows this hadith, they did their traditional sword ceremony, and Umar radiallahu anh wanted to stop it, and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, no, let them finish. And because that was important to them for their culture. So I think I agree, and that's why we supported the Black American Muslim Conference, because they have issues that are specific to them, that they need, that are important to them. And we sent out a letter, officially endorsing the conference, because again, like it's important to them. It's their history, it's their heritage, it's their culture, and we don't want to try to how do I put this, deny it. Again, like I said, the umbrella masjid has its place, but I think cultural masjids and organizations also have their place as well, and I think they're just as important.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. I think that
Well,
from yeah. No, I mean, there's no harm in disagreeing on points, but I think the problem that I have is from what I've seen over the so many decades. I think the cultural mosques and having those divisions actually causes more harm than good It may be good for those particular communities, but not good for the wider community and society. And I think the example that you gave of the Habashis who were doing their sort of ceremonial, traditional, cultural practice at that time, absolutely, you will find that it's completely permissible to do that as long as it doesn't contradict the Sunnah. But that doesn't, it's not an evidence to suggest that they have their own bricks and mortar, their own place, because that's not what they did. They didn't have their own space, if you like, or building to do that. They did it inclusively with the rest of the community.
That's what we need. I think that's exactly what we need. We need to try to find a way of that happening, rather than maybe creating maybe like a separate entity, because I think that's what the impression people might get is if you have your own separate thing, for example. I mean, is that what we're saying, that you'd have something separate in that way?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Like I said, cultural masjids, they have to follow the Sunnah as well. I mean, like, I've never seen of any cultural masjids that disallow worshippers from coming to their masjid. And again, like we're taking a 7th century example and extrapolating it to the 21st century. Like if you go to a masjid in China, all the Muslims are going to be, most of them are going to be from Chinese, and it's going to look like a Chinese mosque, with like Islam spreading outward. I can understand why people would want to criticize the culture masjid, especially when it's in the West. People get the idea that you have to be of this culture to be Muslim. I think their obligation is they have to realize that again, like the majority of the worshippers come from a specific culture, so we should support endeavors to reach out to other communities and let them know that, hey, you guys, like anyone can become a Muslim. You should be able to hold on to your culture. And I think over time, like hopefully they will become more accepting of other cultures as well. But at the same time, like again, like I like being able to go to any masjid I want in a big city, say, hey, I want to get some chicken, I want to get some biryani for iftar, or I can go to the Arab mosque, say, hey, maybe want to get Arabic food. But for us, like, I mean, the goal, maybe even a small brick and mortar office organization with the musalla that is inclusive to everybody, where everybody is invited. But the main core goal is that we want to improve the relationship between the Muslim world and the West, non-Muslim world, our own white community, and the Muslim community at large, because it's very, very, very necessary. There's a lot of Islamophobia.
Yeah, do you not see a danger, Robert, in that, where maybe you might have some attendees that might take it completely the wrong way and take it completely like, this is for us, this is for whites, and then maybe a little bit of white supremacism might sort of come into it as well. I mean, do you not see that there's a potential, even a small potential of that happening? And how would you mitigate that? How would you, deal with something like that?
Well, I run, even on the website, I run a very tight ship. And even when I had a debate discussion with Umar Lee on Blood Brothers, I said, look, if you see anyone posting, any white Muslim posting like this, things that are against Islam, like that maybe even construed as white supremacist stuff, we completely condemn it. We do not allow that at all. And even in giving dawah to like those type of people, we have to very strictly follow the Sunnah as well. So they're not our brothers. Obviously, my brothers are the Muslims, right? They're our tribe, yeah, but they're not our brothers. So we can come to agreement on certain issues like conservative family values and things like that. But when it comes to things like this group is better than that group, no, we have to draw a line in the sand and say no, we don't accept things like that. So because even I don't know that Richard Spencer's actually studying Islam now. If you've seen his YouTube video, I think I gave it to Abu Tayyib as well. I don't know if I showed you that video, but
send it to me.
Send Islam, it to me. But they couldn't find, I don't know if they didn't try, but they couldn't find any Muslims from Ahlus Sunnah to even talk to, or no one reached out to say, hey, maybe we should, give some dawah about Islam. And they ended up talking to Louis Farrakhan from the Nation of Islam, and they invited him in, and that's how they got their information about Islam. And I just thought, oh man, right, you have to weigh the bad and the good. I think that's definitely a point that we are cognizant of, and we don't accept anyone spouting that type of stuff, and we're very, very strict about that. So, like I said, I run a tight ship, and the last thing we want to do is make our Muslim brothers and sisters feel uncomfortable. That's the opposite of what we want to achieve. We want to do our part to try to lower Islamophobia among our own people. So
there's an interesting comment by Muslim BB about this very particular issue. He's asking the question: don't cultural mosques bring about a split in the ummah? The Turkish mosques are for the Turks, the Pakistani ones for the Pakistanis, etc., etc. And that's essentially my point, I guess. But to answer that, and in response to Brother Robert's point, there's some very poignant points there, I think, which I agree with, and in some things, and then obviously some things we need to explore a bit more. But having your own space, I don't have an overall problem with that. I guess it's as long as it is inclusive for everybody. And the problem that I've got is sometimes our mosques, when I say our Asian mosques I'm talking about, they're not very inclusive. And I've seen that. I've had many arguments and challenged it, and hence why the masjid that we set up is very inclusive. And it doesn't have to be, my point is, it doesn't have to be like that. So with our Dawah Center, for example, we have a whole new Muslim support program. Now, does it have to have a separate space in that for certain communities and groups in order for it to be able to support reverts? No, I don't think so. In some regards, yes, maybe having the right people in place, but does it have to be a separate space altogether? Well, our Dawah Center has proven otherwise. The Dawah Center that we run, IDC, actually shows that you can have that diversity. It's in the name, actually, Islamic Diversity Center, right? Can have that diversity whilst sharing the cultural practices and accepting of all the cultures and cultural backgrounds, and being nuanced enough to be able to deal with the challenges that the reverts have. And we've been doing this since 2002. 18 years, right? So we've been doing this for almost 18 years. And we found quite a good balance, actually, where you can get white reverts, black reverts, Asian reverts, South Asian reverts, and also those who are born into Muslim families to be able to share the same space and come to an understanding between one another without compromising each other's cultures, if that makes sense.
I just need to get my charger for my iPad before I black out on you guys.
Go for it.
At 10%, I'll be back.
We'll go through some of the comments while you get your charger, yeah?
Yeah, I'll be right back. Hold on a second.
All right, no problem. We've got Brother Goran. Let's start with Brother Goran. He says, "Oh Allah, grant shifa to those suffering from coronavirus. Dua by Sheikh Sudais." Ameen, absolutely. May Allah protect everybody, the Muslims and the wider community, everybody else, all humans, from this fitna that we're facing today of the coronavirus. Let's see, what other comments do we have? We'll come to the question in a moment when Brother Robert's back. Assalamu alaikum from Brother Tariq.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Wa alaikum salam. Is the Nation of Islam still big in America? From what I know, I don't think they're as big as they used to be. Here's a question for you, Jamal, from Muslim BB. I always get confused about this. Do you prefer convert or revert, or does it not make a difference? What's your reply to that, Jamal?
So my preference is revert rather than convert, because as we know, we're all born in the fitra. So as we know, before we're even born, we're Muslims. And then when we're born, we become whatever our parents, whatever faith they are. So when we come to the deen of Islam, it just makes sense when someone says revert. It makes sense. Whereas a convert, obviously that's the more common term. But convert makes it come across as if it was something which is alien to begin with, whereas the submission and the Islam was never alien in the beginning. So revert, definitely 100%. I've never used the term convert, never. Revert just is just sweet, isn't it?
What about you, Brother Robert? What's your preference, revert or convert? Muslim BB is asking the question. He always gets confused about this. Do you prefer convert or revert, or does it not make a difference?
It doesn't make a difference to me. I think there's so many issues that converts have, especially especially here, that it's just so far down on my list. It doesn't. If I had to choose, I'd go convert, just because even though I can understand why the term revert applies. Again, even though yes, people were born on the fitra, but you're relearning. You have to learn a totally, you have to learn how to pray, you have to learn how to fast, you have to learn Quran, you have to learn all these things. So it's still a process, but it doesn't really matter to me. I just here's the issue altogether. We have more important things to talk about.
No, I remember there's a very famous sister, mashallah, who we knew her before she became Muslim, and she used to hate the term revert. What's this revert? She used to hate it. Because obviously because she didn't have that understanding anyway. So but now mashallah, she's come into the deen, and she fully understands that. But yeah, I mean, if it makes someone feel a bit offish when you use that term, then you don't have to use it. You can interchange it as you wish anyway.
Yeah, I just don't want to get into an argument about it. I mean, yeah.
Okay, so Muslim BB is also asking, what are the biggest challenges that reverts have? So in your experience, Brother Robert, what would you say? Let's say the top three biggest challenges that reverts face in Canada. What would you say that they were?
Feeling loneliness is a huge factor. That's the first thing that came to my mind. I mean, especially we're such a dispersed country of Muslims. Like a lot of the times, you're having iftar on your own, you're having suhoor on your own, you're going to Eid prayer, like as the only Muslim member of your family. Whereas you see all these smiling families on Eid. Like alhamdulillah, like a lot of brothers are really helping me out with that. So that helps out a lot. But loneliness is definitely one of them. For me, I think when I first converted, fasting was definitely a challenge. I was used to eating like every half hour. So that, that was back when Ramadan was in November. I mean, alhamdulillah, like I didn't convert when, Ramadan was in June. I had time to like prepare and everything. So for me personally, fasting was difficult. Like feeling that, I don't know, like it's such a see, when I first converted, I had such a zeal. I think after the years go on, I think if negative experiences happen to you, I think bitterness is a factor as well. And you have to just, you can't get bitter because, you know that Allah was going to test you, and you have to be very grateful that He guided you to Islam. But, you're going to, many converts, and it's inevitable, even people who are born Muslim, we're going to encounter many battle scars and, like Muslims who like physically assaulted them and, negative situations like that. And you just can't let that affect your deen. But at the same time, it's inevitable. Like, you just, after a while, you just sort of develop this Pavlovian reaction to, anyone saying anything negative. So, I mean, that's over the years, it can kind of wear you out, but you just have to keep saying alhamdulillah for everything.
Absolutely. Yeah. Alhamdulillah. That's absolutely correct. Jamal, what about you, bro? Would you say the top three challenges as a revert? What would you say they are?
Wow, very, very good question. I mean, based on some of the things and the concerns that Robert highlighted earlier, one of the biggest challenges, if you are alone in terms of, for example, a black revert in the locality or a white revert in a locality, and you go to the masjid and you have no understanding of the deen whatsoever, you do feel very, very alien, and you feel also very isolated. And although you might have warm, like greetings, and you might feel very welcome, but it's like what happens after that. As you mentioned, culture, things like that, and even the culture, even the natural culture of the deen itself, like it's still, even that is very alien to you. And when you assimilate into that, you feel it's a challenge. It's very much of a challenge because you go home and you sort of maybe start to question whether you're doing the right thing or not. But when you have other reverts around you, that's completely different. When I became Muslim, I had my brother-in-laws around with me, and that was completely different. Obviously going in to take my shahada and coming out, but we experience we see many reverts who are on their own, and they, for example, Robert, you took it, you went online and you found out about Islam, and then you took it, so you took your Shahada. So after that point, you know, where do you go from there? So that's a big, massive challenge, and I think many people have left the deen because of it. That's probably one of the greatest challenges, and I guess, yeah, I mean, the others are just the fact that, you know, when you do experience hostilities in terms of from you know, from another race of Muslims, that is also quite a big challenge. You don't, obviously, the way you feel, the way you're made to feel. But for myself, I've never really experienced that again, because, you know, obviously, it's more about just going to someone and engaging with them straight away. And then you'll find out if someone's a bit offish or whatever, then, you know, you can just disregard them. And very quickly, if you have that kind of personality, you'll start to find decent people straight away, and then you can sort of grasp onto them, and they sort of take it on the journey. But definitely the biggest challenge is just getting there and assimilating, and, you know, for want of a better word, that is very difficult, you know. So yeah, I mean, I know there are many, many challenges, but that's just one of the first things when you come into the deen, just understanding that and understanding.
That's interesting that you say that, because one of the things that we normally advise when it comes to, especially for brand new Muslims, you know, those who have recently taken their Shahada, what we normally try to do is straight away get them a mentor, right? A good, solid, practicing brother upon the Sunnah or sister upon the Sunnah, who will be able to teach them not only the Salah, but also the basics of Aqidah, the basics of their deen, so that we don't usually just tell them just go straight to the masjid. We normally try and get them transitioned, I guess, to get into the community where it's not going to cause them confusion, where it's not going to cause them these, you know, some of these bad experiences that some people have when they're left on their own. So a case of making sure that it's the appropriate people are with them, not just left to their own devices. And I can give you a quick example of a disaster that happened with one of our reverts, the ones that we were supporting. He basically he went to one of the cultural mosques, if I can call it that. And by the way, when I say cultural mosque, I don't mean it with any disrespect, right? And I don't mean it in a negative way like that. It's just there are some things which, in my view, can cause more harm than good, and then gives those negative experiences, which could have been avoided. That's the reason why I'm using quotation marks and explaining it this way. Is he went by himself, very new in the religion. He went by himself to go and pray. I think it was Isha Salah in one of the masjids. And the old uncles that were there, again, this was like 20 whatever years ago. He went there to pray Sunnah before the Salah started, and then it was like he had, by the time he finished his Salah, he had like a ring of brothers surrounding him, just observing him praying in their own language, saying, "What is he doing? Is he supposed to be here? Did he come to the wrong place or whatever?" You know, it's like guys, come on, man, relax. This is he's a Muslim. He's come here. He had such a negative experience. He goes, "I'm never going to the masjid again." Right? And I said to him, "Bro, this is why we work with certain masajid, because they're a bit more open-minded, if you like, and they're a bit more accepting of other cultures. Whereas if they've just got their own culture, it's a bit more difficult for them to accept somebody from outside of their culture who would pray there, and they weren't just used to it, right? So I think that's to avoid those negative experiences. I think there's the same way with the marriage thing that Brother Robert mentioned earlier on. You know, there was one brother, he said he became Muslim, and every time somebody came to congratulate him or give him salams, "Brother, you married yet? Are you married yet? You want to get married yet?" And he was so sick of hearing it. Honestly, he pushed him nearly to the edge of leaving Islam, because he said, "I don't want to get married. I'm not ready to get married. I'm not interested in getting married." And I said, look, and I agreed with him. I said, you need to learn your religion first, so that when you are ready to get married, you know where you stand with all of this. So there are a number of negative aspects that come with this, which I totally understand the website Islam for Europeans, because it can deal with some of those challenges from a completely different perspective. I totally understand that.
Yeah. If I could add something, it just popped in my head. One of the challenges, and I didn't really think about this until years after I became Muslim. I think if I could encapsulate it, would be being put on a pedestal sometimes, because a lot of the times especially the white convert, the mosque will take them in and they'll be like this white savior, and like, oh, this person's gonna, be a sort of like, like reform our whole society, and like, like take our mosque to like the next level, and a lot of the times they're just totally not prepared for this. They don't understand the culture, they understand their religion, and they're put into these positions and given all this aid and and positions. And I can understand to an extent where the mosque is coming from, because they're trying to like keep them in the deen, but a lot of the times, for example, like they'll put such a high emphasis on it. Like we had one brother who converted recently. This happened years ago, and they gave him a free Umrah trip, and he had not been Muslim for more than a couple of weeks. So they spent all this money on him. He went to Umrah. He didn't understand what he was doing. Like why are we walking around why are we walking around this black stone? Why are we walking back and forth from here? Like, why is this culture the way it is? Why am I running across the street in like a crowded like freeway to get to this restaurant? Like when he got back, he was depressed because the mosque just spent all this money on him, and like the guy who still was beforehand was drinking alcohol. So once he started drinking again, like it was almost like he was back on the wagon, and he just felt so much shame, he just didn't want to go back. So I think if we look at the early Sahaba, like they didn't have to follow any ahkam for like the first 13 years. It was just la ilaha illallah. I'm not saying that we should be given 13 years to learn the deen, but I think our expectations sometimes of converts are just very high, because when we think of a convert, we think someone whose iman is at like such a high level. Like when they meet a convert, like, oh my God, you're so much stronger than I am. And you don't know, this convert might be going through, like committing sins left and right. So I think being put on a pedestal is something we need to, and that's one of the things we stress on our website, is that we want to be taken away from this white savior status that is just making things worse for everybody.
I agree with that 100%. I think because it's throwing people in the deep end. Essentially, that's what it is, and I completely understand what you're saying there, and I definitely don't disagree with that. I think putting people on a pedestal generally is problematic, but certainly when you're a new Muslim, the expectations are too high. Sometimes we set the bar a bit too high, and that can be really, really detrimental. I've no doubt. I mean, I remember a brother who. He's actually from Brazil. He went to I can't remember the full story. I just remember hearing one of the brothers telling me about him, and essentially what happened was he committed suicide. He went that far that it was affecting him. So he was so depressed. I don't know what the actual causes were, whether it was because of the masjid or this. I don't know what the reasons were. He may have had mental health issues prior to accepting Islam. I don't know, but the point was he was so depressed that he eventually took his own life. And the interesting thing was the person who was mentoring him was another Brazilian revert to Islam. So he was supposed to meet him a week that day, and then the brother said, "No, I'll meet you next week." He cancelled on him last minute, and then the next thing he finds out, on the day that he was supposed to meet him a week later, he had committed suicide.
Yeah.
So his mentor was somebody from his actual.
Well, that's the issue with the
plate.
So sorry, they cut out of me audio.
Yeah, go for it.
So that's one of the issues I have with mentorship, is that you're basically entrusting it to one person. So, we're supposed to hold tight the rope of Allah, but when you only have one person holding that rope, it's all or nothing. Whereas in the sub-community concept, you have several people, who are there, who have their own, who have, like a cultural community, like they're inviting of everybody. They still belong to the greater ummah, so they're still connected in that way. But at the same time, like if someone cancels, there's other people that can pick you up, or you can, there's a place you can go to where you have people who've gone through the same experiences. So I briefly wanted to talk about, because
it wasn't the mentor that cancelled, it was the mentee that cancelled and rearranged. Yeah, he rearranged. It wasn't the mentor. The mentor was regularly meeting him because obviously they were nearby. It wasn't like they were miles apart, but there was a regular communication with him and the mentor.
But again, that's based on
the
time
mentee
schedule.
was the one
Right?
who cancelled. Sorry.
It's based on time schedule too, right? So maybe they're like, oh, we can only meet at this time. I'm working 9 to 5 this time. So, like it's based on both people's schedules. So, like the more people you have helping you out, right?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
The
And I think this is why with the New Muslim Support Program, we have a mentor program to do the specific, but they always meet as a collective. So when we have revert classes, for example, or when we have revert community socials and programs, it's with the mentors and the mentees collectively. So there's a group so that they have people that can bounce off each other in case there's any other issues. Sometimes mentors mentors and mentees don't get on with each other, personality clashes, right? So it can't just be solely dependent on one person. So it has to be, but the beautiful thing about the way that we've set it up is all the mentors are not all reverts, and some are not, and all the du'at are not all revert either. It's very, very mixed and diverse. The head of the New Muslim program is a revert himself of white English origin, but the mentors themselves, we have a very specific way in which we empower new Muslims with the mentor program. So I think, yeah, absolutely. I think there's a community aspect to it. There's no doubt. But would I say keep it to one ethnicity only or one sub community only? No, I don't think that is. I don't think that would be the most productive way of integration and into the community. Because remember, there's a difference between assimilation and integration. They're two very different things.
Well,
yeah.
What you're talking about is separation. So if you type in Berry, Berry, that was a psychologist who created the model of acculturative stress, and it's a basic 2x2 model in psychology. The two questions you basically ask are: do you feel connected to your own community, like the community you grew up in, right? And how are you willing to reach out and connect with your new community? If you answer yes to both, that's what we call integration. So you know it's not one or the other, you're connected to both, right? So that's the best outcome. If you have just your own community, that's separation. So that's worse than integration, right? If you have assimilation, that's the inverse. So basically leaving your one community and coming to another one, and that's worse than integration. Then marginalization is neither. So that's the worst outcome. So they found that with people, they use this for people who came to the West, came from different countries, as a measure of like they measure different things like anxiety levels and blood pressure and stress, and integration was always the best outcome, right? So for converts, it's the inverse. So our what was the outside, the new community for them is the old community for us, and what is the new community for us is the old community for them. So integration is definitely the best outcome, but understanding what that is that it's not one or the other, it's both. So and that's why people have the best outcomes.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's a good way of explaining it. One of the things that is unfortunately, again, it's due to ignorance and lack of knowledge, and again that cultural aspect of some of the communities and ultimately comes down to not understanding the other as well, where it becomes. I've seen reverts who we haven't mentored, but we've met them later on down the line where they've become Asianized, right? They're wearing Asian clothing and they've learned Urdu and not Arabic, for example. Yeah. So they've become Asianized rather than Islamicized, if I can use that term as well, right? And similarly, you have the opposite of Europeanizing or Britishizing Islam, which can have a similar adverse effect as well. So it's the idea is, I think that the best way from experience to avoid having this sort of extremism, I guess, to some extent, of reactionary dawah, or reacting to some of those bad experiences, or reacting to this cultural appropriation, I guess, in some regards, or assimilation, where it becomes almost like, and I've seen this happen as well, when there's that much division and separation, I guess, as well. I've seen this sort of anti-Asian, anti-Arab, in some cases anti-black, in some cases anti-white sentiments that come by making these divisions. And this is what we want to avoid, I guess. We want to avoid having those, by having good intentions of having sub-communities where then it eventually becomes anti this or anti that. And that's I guess that's one of the dangers that can happen. And I just want to give an example. Sorry, Jabal, go for it, and then I'll give a quick example of that.
I can say because if you have a collective of people who may be sharing their bad experiences, that could also become quite it could create adverse kind of consequences based off of that, because obviously then their sort of reaction or their response or their feelings towards those cultural kind of masajids and communities can become quite bad. So there are dangers there. I know I mentioned it earlier on, but that's something, obviously, Robert, as you said, you got your eye on the ball. So I think that's reassuring to know, because, again, you might start to get some maybe sort of really animosity, people feeling a lot of animosity towards their own brothers and sisters.
It can become an echo chamber. Essentially, it can end up being an echo chamber. And this is the danger, I guess, that we want to try and challenge. And don't get me wrong, listen, within I could talk about the Asian community, the South Asian community. Within our community, we have a lot of problems and a lot of ignorance, especially towards our revert brothers and sisters. I'm not going to hide it. I'm not going to shy away from that and hide from that at all. It's one of the things that we are challenging day in, day out. And what we don't want is, because certain perceptions and assumptions are made about the other, right? What we don't want to do is exasperate that as well at the same time. So almost becoming like, adversaries, rather than trying to integrate and become an ummah and a community. It can exasperate those perceptions from both sides. It's not just one side, but certainly from the South. One thing I can talk about is some of the challenges that I face dealing with some of the ignorance, I guess, within the community. And honestly, the solution is, the eye of the Quran. The solution is this eye of the Quran, I believe, and I believe this strongly. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu kunu qawwamina lillahi shuhada'a bil qist. O you who believe, show integrity for the sake of Allah, bearing witness with justice. And then the verse goes on to talk about, do not let hatred for people incite you into not being just. Be just. That is closer to Iman. And God is aware of everything that you do. And I guess that the point here is, when we go back to the Quran, when we go back to the authentic Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, when we go back to the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum and understand Islam how they understood it, I can assure you, and I'm pretty confident that the vast majority of problems that we face within our communities will be resolved. And the classic example of that is the Sahaba Thumama ibn Uthal. If you study his life and his way that he came to Islam, he was very anti-Muslim, completely. He was an enemy of Islam, and he was racist as well. He was completely pro-Arab, anti-everything else, right? But when he when he got captured and was in Medina for those 3 days, and it was only 3 days it took for him, he observed the diversity of Islam while he was in the Prophet's mosque. He observed the way in which a former slave, for example, was treated with dignity and respect, the same way as a noble Arab would have been, right? But because of Islam, and he makes the comment when he gets let loose and he comes back and takes the Shahada, becomes Muslim, he makes the comment that, you can just imagine what he observed. The Muslims praying together, the diversity of the Salah, the diversity of the way that the Muslims were treated with respect, regardless of ethnicity, social class, so on and so forth. He makes the point. He says that in Jahiliyyah, in our days of ignorance, we Arabs, we would fight each other based upon tribalism. But you, O Muhammad, you have, peace sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you have basically brought together and looked beyond all of these cultural permutations and united everybody upon the kalima tawheed of la ilaha illallah. And that's the most beautiful, most powerful thing that you can see. Imagine that, an enemy of Islam seeing the power and beauty of la ilaha illallah uniting the diverse communities. You had Salman Farsi, Suhaib Rumi, you had Bilal, and so on and so forth. And the power of that it was so powerful that he actually became Muslim. It opened his heart. Allah opened his heart that he accepted Islam because of that diversity that he saw. So I'm very much a big promoter of this diversity, that the beauty of the diversity of Islam. And essentially it comes down to lack of knowledge, and a lack of knowledge not only of the deen, but I believe lack of knowledge of knowing the other as well, knowing other people's cultures and backgrounds and respecting those sort of barriers as well.
Well, it's not that I don't disagree with you. I completely agree with you that, like we said, Islam is beautiful in its diversity, and it's one of the principles of the Quran that like a Muslim as a brother of another Muslim. I just think it's the sort of the way forward in achieving that we kind of differ on. I'm saying that like there are different Muslim cultures all around the world. They're all our Muslim brothers and sisters. There are distinctions. There are cultural distinctions, and even during the Prophet's time, even though everybody was united upon Islam, like for example, you mentioned Salman al-Farisi. He instructed him to translate the Quran into Farsi, and to go to Persia, to give da'wah to his people. Like the Bani Aus and Bani Khazraj. Wow. And one of the battles, I'm not sure which is what, but they each had their own battle flags representing each clan, right? And then after the battle, the tribal leaders still remain leaders of that tribe. So I think, alhamdulillah, Islam is great in its diversity. I just think that that these cultural differences are unavoidable sometimes, and it's a reality. I mean, the cultural masters are always going to exist, and I think the best way forward for us to heal any animosities between cultures is to establish dialogue and invite each other over for iftar. I'm totally a fan of cross masjid iftars, but at the same time, when you step into that mosque, you are immersed in that culture, and I don't think we should. And I think that's an important aspect of Islam that we shouldn't get rid of. And for the convert, like I said, we're in a totally different situation. And like we said, it's a reality that most people in the Muslim world are highly endogamous, and and for many times for them, like if they're not prepared to, for example, marry into another culture, even if they're from the same country, because they feel that they're not compatible. For the convert, yes, it can work, but all we're saying is that it's not a panacea, and we should have that option. That we should be able to grow a convert sub community from the ground up. That way, we can give dawah better to our own people. So, I do agree with you, but I just think the way forward that we're trying to achieve that is a little bit different.
I think and again, you make some very, very valid points. I think some of the things that you mentioned there about the Khazraj and they had their own flags, but that doesn't make it right though. Like even for example, the Prophet said, whoever fights for his tribalism and asabiya is not from us. He's not from us. I agree. And so that particular example you gave there, the end part is that the Prophet rejected that. And even with the Muslim communities around the world, with their cultures, etc., again, just because they have their particular cultures and dogmas and whatever else it is that they have, doesn't make it right either. There are certain practices that they have in their cultures which we reject, right? Even if it's from our own cultures. And this is why I find it quite interesting when I was growing up. I didn't come from a religious family at all. And when I was growing up, when I started practicing the religion, for example, one of the first things that I did when I found the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, I rejected all of my culture. I rejected it completely, especially the bits which were contrary to the Sunnah. And the reason why I did that was simply because I wanted to unite upon, like how the Prophet ﷺ did in Medina, unite upon the kalima of Tawheed. I very sharp found out that it's not as simplistic as that, right? So there are certain things from the culture that, are completely acceptable as long as it's within the confinements. That's why I said right at the beginning, there's certain aspects which intertwine with the Sunnah and the religion, and certain things which will clash with the Sunnah. So just because certain Muslims have certain cultural practices that they are sticking to doesn't necessarily make it right either. And we shouldn't have, my personal view is we shouldn't have fall into that same mistake that they've made and follow in their footsteps just because they're doing it. We should have a more pragmatic approach to it, and one that I've been using for the last 20 years, which I know works, of having that more diverse and open and, like you said, integration perspective. And it's interesting because, you know, I was in the Balkans last year. I've been to the Balkans a number of times, and it's a beautiful place. Bosnia in particular, I've fallen in love with Bosnia, I'll be honest, yeah. And I was traveling through the different Bosniak countries, and I ended up in Skopje in Macedonia, and I was sitting with a group of 15 scholars from Macedonia. And they basically they hosted me for the evening. We had a good discussion about dawah and how things should be moved forward. And the interesting thing was, all of those scholars were indigenous white European scholars. And I was expecting, oh yeah, I'm going to go see the scholars. I expect them all to be in like thobes and, you know, the scarves and all that. And when I walked in, it was like they're all wearing like shirts and trousers and suits and stuff. Like one guy was wearing a suit, they looked like he stepped out of the 80s, yeah, like with the shoulder pads and everything, right? And I was like, whoa, what about, I was supposed to meet the scholars here, what's going on? But it was interesting because the head of the organization, he said, what you have to realize is that we're indigenous European Muslims, and we're the only indigenous European Muslims on the continent. We're not immigrants, we're from here. And the interesting thing that he said was this is where I've learned most of this stuff from, actually, from him, the things I'm talking about. He didn't have this idea of having sub communities and separating and you know, and all this sort of stuff. He was a lot more pragmatic than that. He said, we've come off the back of a war in Bosnia in the 90s, where Muslims from all over the world came to help and support us, right? Literally from all over the world. And he said, but we still didn't become Arabized, Asianized, whateverized, right? He said we still held on to our identity and managed to and practiced our deen based upon the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, not based upon having subsets and sub-communities and so on and so forth. So it was interesting the way that he explained it to me, because that was a real eye-opener for me. And the way that he explained it was quite interesting, because he was, like I said, he was coming from a perspective of understanding the nuances and the cultural context of the European dawah. And at the same time, he has masajid with Turkish imams. And this is in the middle of indigenous Bosnian Muslims, for example, yeah? They have masajid which are not specifically for any particular group or subgroup or ethnicity. So that was the interesting thing that I found from my experience when I was there. But like I said, different communities have different contexts. In Canada, you know the situation better than we know it here. In UK, we know our situation better over here. But it's interesting that whenever I travel around Europe, because I do a lot of traveling around Europe with the dawah, and it's a bit of a weird one, because I don't hold the view that it should be only Europeans giving dawah to Europeans only. Right.
Well, I don't agree with that either. I agree with you.
Yeah. And the idea that it's more effective or less effective, I think it's very debatable, the whole issue. But it's very interesting, the dynamics that have come about from that. So, but yeah, it's Robert. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure talking to you. I'm really glad you came on. Is there any final words that you'd like to say to the audience before we wrap this show? In fact, before not wrap it up, before we hand over to Jamal to give us some health advice, right? Because he's our in-house health advisor, if you like. Health advisor. But yeah, any final words, Robert, before you for the viewers out there?
I just want to wish everyone a blessed Ramadan, all my Muslim brothers and sisters. May Allah accept our fast from us this year. Let's keep everybody safe, inshallah. Let's keep the good deeds going. And if you want to check out our website, islamforeuropeans.com, Islam4Europeans.com, and provide your feedback. We'd really appreciate it. I'm also available on Twitter. Robert of Canada is my name there. But yeah, I have to break my fast right now, actually. So I'll leave it at that.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much, Brother Robert, for joining us.
No problem.
Jamal, what? And you got any final words? Any health advice or just general advice you want to give?
Just very quick. I don't know if Robert wants to leave to break his fast, but it's very, very quick. Basically, it takes about 30 days or 40 days to create a habit, right? So we're talking about trying to keep fit and have a healthy routine. If you haven't been keeping up throughout this month of Ramadan, Muslim BB, Gregors, Nosko, Hafsa, Muslim BB, all of you, if you haven't been keeping up the routine, all the other viewers as well, you have to now try to make sure that you make an extra effort now. We're in the last 10 days of Ramadan. Every single day, if you can, a small token exercise of some form, so that after Ramadan you can continue, inshallah. So that's the thing. Create your habit and stick to it, inshallah. And don't make excuses, which many of us do. That's the advice today, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much, Brother Jamal. Thank you, Brother Robert. We're going to wrap it up there. We'll accept it from you, bro. So good conversation, guys.
Yes.
That's the end of the show today. We'll be back tomorrow with Brother Ayaz from India, who's going to talk about Islam and Dawah in India, inshallah. So make sure you tune in tomorrow midnight, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair, everybody. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.